Michael Turner had always been seen as a devoted husband and father in the quiet town of Devon. People admired his calm nature and his dedication to his family. He worked as a financial consultant, earning enough to give his wife Clara and their children, 10-year-old Evelyn and 6-year-old Liam, a comfortable life. Their home sat at the end of a friendly cul-de-sac, where neighbors often waved from gardens and children played on the pavement. To everyone watching, the Turners represented stability, love, and everything a family should be. When Michael announced he was taking his family on a weekend trip to Cornwall, it seemed like a thoughtful surprise. Clara shared cheerful pictures online of the children, packing their small suitcases, their smiles wide with excitement at the idea of a seaside vacation. Behind the pleasant exterior, Michael was slowly drowning in secrets he could no longer control. For the past several months, he had spent late nights not working as Clara believed, but gambling online. It had started as harmless curiosity, then grew into a dangerous habit that consumed him. When losses piled up, he made a choice that sealed his fate. He used company funds, convincing himself he would win enough to put everything back. Instead, he lost even more. The fear of consequences became a shadow that followed him everywhere. Each morning, he dressed for work like nothing was wrong, hiding the panic rising inside him. Clara noticed he had grown quieter, distant, and easily distracted, but she assumed it was stress from long hours and deadlines. The trip to Cornwall was not a celebration or a family treat. It was an escape, a temporary shield to avoid the storm he sensed approaching. Michael needed time away before cracks in his story became visible. He convinced himself that a change of scenery would help him think clearly, maybe even find a solution. The family loaded into their car that Friday afternoon with snacks, games, and laughter filling the air, unaware that the man behind the wheel was fighting a battle within himself. For a moment, as the coastline came into view and the scent of sea salt drifted through the open windows, Michael felt a brief sense of calm, like life might still be fixable. When they arrived at the small cottage near the beach, the children rushed around exploring each room. Clara admired the quiet beauty of the place, believing this trip could bring them all closer again. Michael's smile appeared, but it was thin and tired, barely holding together the weight of everything he carried. He excused himself to get some fresh air and walked toward the shoreline alone. As waves rolled in softly, he stared at the horizon and tried to imagine any version of his future that didn't end in disaster. The sea looked peaceful, endless, and silent, unlike the chaos in his mind. He returned to the cottage with a forced cheerfulness that made Clara uneasy. The first night should have been filled with joy, yet something invisible and heavy lingered in the air, setting the tone for a trip that was never meant to heal anything at all. The next morning brought golden sunlight spilling through the thin curtains of the seaside cottage. Clara woke early, making breakfast while humming softly to herself. Evelyn and Liam ran through the small kitchen giggling, their faces glowing with excitement for another day by the ocean. Michael sat at the table, stirring his coffee, but never drinking it. His eyes looked tired, unfocused, as though his body was present, but his thoughts were miles away. Clara tried to draw him into conversation about what they might do that day, visit the town, explore the cliffs, maybe have lunch by the pier, but Michael only nodded absently. His phone buzzed twice, each vibration pulling a flicker of tension across his face. He slipped it into his pocket without checking it, not wanting his family to see the message that confirmed his worst fear. His company had discovered the missing funds. Clara decided to take the children into town to give him some space, assuming he needed rest from work pressure. Evelyn begged her father to come along, but he declined gently, saying he'd join later. Before leaving, Evelyn handed him a small seashell she had found the previous evening, a perfect heart shape, smooth and pale. She smiled shyly and said he should keep it because it was lucky. Michael forced a small grin and placed it in his wallet beside his bank cards. never imagining how significant that tiny gesture would become. As the cottage door closed behind them, silence wrapped around him. He pulled out his phone again and reread the email from his boss. The message was short and cold, informing him that discrepancies had been found in financial reports and that an immediate investigation was underway. His hands trembled as he realized his secret life was collapsing. He imagined the humiliation on Clara's face when she discovered everything, the loss of his career, the shame that would follow him everywhere. His world was unraveling, and the walls of the quiet cottage began to feel smaller, as if they were closing in on him. By the time Clara and the children returned with ice creams and souvenirs, Michael was sitting stiffly on the couch, his face pale. He pretended to be fine, claiming he had been reading by the window, but the atmosphere had shifted. His silence was heavier now, colder, filled with invisible weight. Clara tried to lighten the mood with stories from town, showing him a photo Evelyn had taken near the beach. He nodded politely, but said little. That evening, as the children drifted to sleep, Clara watched her husband standing at the window, staring into the dark horizon. His reflection in the glass looked hollow, almost unrecognizable. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but stopped herself, afraid of the answer. Later, when everyone was asleep, Evelyn woke briefly to get a drink of water. She saw her father's wallet on the kitchen counter and smiled, remembering the heart-shaped shell she had given him. Without thinking too deeply, she took a scrap of paper from her notebook and wrote a small note with her childlike handwriting. "Please don't be sad. Daddy, we love you even when you're quiet." She folded it neatly and slipped it into his wallet before returning to bed. The gesture was simple and sweet, something she thought would make her father smile in the morning. But it was a message that would become a haunting reminder of love too late to save. The third day of the Turner family's trip began with dark clouds rolling in from the sea, a gray curtain covering what had once been a bright sky. The air carried the scent of rain and salt, and waves crashed harder than usual against the rocks. Clara suggested they stay indoors until the weather cleared, and the children quickly turned the small living room into a playground of board games, laughter, and snacks. Evelyn and Liam's joy filled the space, but Michael barely joined in. He sat near the window, staring out at the restless sea, his mind spinning with panic. Every sound of thunder reminded him of the chaos waiting back home, emails unanswered, investigations beginning, and the truth ready to destroy the image he had spent years building. He kept checking his phone, though no new messages came. The silence from his office only made him more anxious. He could imagine his coworkers whispering, his boss calling the authorities, and headlines forming around his name. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. Each time he looked at his children, he felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made him sick. They trusted him completely, unaware that their father's choices were dragging them toward ruin. Clara noticed his pale face and asked softly if he was feeling unwell. He muttered something about needing air and went outside despite the rain. Outside, the storm was wild. The wind tore at his clothes, and rain hit his face like needles. Standing by the edge of the beach, he felt small and powerless. He tried to convince himself there was still a way out. Perhaps he could confess, repay the money, and rebuild his life. But every possible future ended the same way: prison, shame, and his family turning away from him. The storm grew louder, echoing the turmoil in his mind. He stayed out there for nearly an hour before returning, soaked and trembling. Clara fussed over him, wrapping him in a blanket and urging him to rest, but he only nodded, his eyes distant. That night, when everyone else was asleep, Michael sat alone in the living room with the lights off. The only illumination came from flashes of lightning cutting through the windows. On the small coffee table lay his wallet. As he reached for it, a folded piece of paper slipped out. Curious, he unfolded it and saw Evelyn's handwriting. "Please don't be sad, Daddy. We love you even when you're quiet. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The simplicity of those words hit him harder than anything else could have. It was love, pure and innocent, from the child he was about to destroy with his mistakes. Tears filled his eyes as he read the note again and again. He whispered to himself that they deserved better than what he had given them. In his twisted mind, the thought began to take shape that maybe the only way to protect them from his failures was to make sure none of them had to face the disgrace that awaited. As the thunder roared above and lightning flickered across the sky, Michael Turner made a decision he could never take back. The storm outside masked the beginning of something far darker inside that little cottage, a calm, quiet descent into something irreversible. Morning came slowly, gray light pushing through the clouds that hung low over the Cornish coast. The cottage was eerily still, and the cheerful sounds that once filled it had vanished. The cleaner, who was scheduled to prepare the property for the next guests, arrived that afternoon when the Turners didn't check out as planned. She knocked several times, but heard nothing. Through the window, she saw the curtains drawn tight and the faint outline of a chair knocked over. Unease crept over her as she opened the door using the spare key kept under the mat. Inside, the air felt heavy and cold, as if the place itself was holding its breath. The first thing she noticed was the untouched breakfast table, 2 bowls, half filled with cereal, a small plate of toast, and a cup of coffee gone cold. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second amplifying the silence. She called out for anyone, but no reply came. When she climbed the narrow stairs, the smell of damp air mixed with something metallic and faint. The door to the master bedroom stood open. Inside, Clara lay still on the bed, her hand resting across her stomach, her face peaceful but lifeless. Panic surged through the cleaner as she stumbled backward and opened the next room. Evelyn and Liam lay side by side, tucked neatly under their blankets as if sleeping. There were no signs of struggle, no broken furniture, no blood. It looked as though the family had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. The police arrived within the hour, sealing off the area. Detectives moved carefully through each room, documenting everything. On the knit-stand beside Michael's side of the bed sat his wedding ring, a watch, and a folded piece of paper. It was blank, but Michael himself was nowhere to be found. His clothes, wallet, and car keys were missing. There were no footprints leading away from the cottage, only tire tracks fading toward the coastal road. As detectives pieced the scene together, they found traces of a sedative in the remains of the family's dinner from the previous night. It was enough to suggest that Michael had carefully planned the act, ensuring his wife and children would never wake to fear or pain. His car was found hours later, near the cliff's edge overlooking the sea. Inside it were his phone, his wedding ring, and his wallet. The wallet held cash, cards, and one small, water-damaged note written in a child's handwriting. "Please don't be sad, Daddy. We love you even when you're quiet." The discovery of that note changed everything. Detectives stared at it for a long time, realizing the emotional weight behind it. It was the last link between a father's unraveling mind and the family he had destroyed. The sea below the cliff was deep and rough, and it seemed likely he had jumped, but no body was found. The tide was strong enough to carry anything away within hours. Still, investigators couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's disappearance wasn't an act of remorse. It was an extension of his plan, one final deception in a life built on secrets. As the waves crashed endlessly below, the case shifted from tragedy to something far more chilling, a carefully constructed illusion of disappearance. For the first 48 hours after the Turner family was found, the nation believed that Michael Turner had taken his own life after killing his wife and children. News channels reported it as a tragic ending to a father who had lost control under the weight of financial collapse. Candlelight vigils were held in Devon, neighbors cried, and online tributes painted Michael as a man who broke under pressure rather than a cold-minded murderer. But everything changed when a petrol station attendant from a service station on the outskirts of Bristol came forward with CCTV footage. That shook the investigation. The footage, recorded a full day after Michael's abandoned car was discovered on the cliff, showed a man matching Michael's appearance at the station. His hair was shorter, his beard trimmed, and he was wearing clothes different from those found at the cottage. He kept his face down, paid in cash, and left quickly, but not before withdrawing money from an ATM nearby. The timestamp proved he was alive and on the move. Detectives now had a new theory. Michael had never intended to end his life. Instead, he had crafted an exit plan before the killings. The sedatives used, the placement of the wedding ring, the dramatic location of the abandoned car, it was all staged to mislead the police into believing he had chosen death. Investigators traced the ATM withdrawal, discovering that he had accessed Clara's bank account earlier that morning, emptying it completely. He had then driven through smaller, lesser-monitored roads to avoid traffic cameras. In the glove compartment of the car, police found a ferry schedule for routes heading to France, Ireland, and Spain, suggesting he had considered several escape paths. The hunt for Michael Turner escalated, turning into an international pursuit. Border alerts were sent out, ferry passengers from nearby ports were questioned, and ports along the English Channel increased security checks. The media, once sympathetic, now shifted its tone sharply, labeling him a calculated killer who had betrayed the trust of his own family. Interviews surfaced with Michael's colleagues, who hinted at recent changes in his behavior: nervousness, secrecy, and sudden unexplained absences from work. One coworker mentioned seeing him shred documents late at night weeks before the trip. Another recalled overhearing a tense phone call that ended with Michael punching the wall of his office. As the investigation intensified, detectives also uncovered rental car receipts under a different name, Daniel Rose, linked to a vehicle picked up the same evening his family's bodies were found. The car was returned 3 days later to a different rental branch. Surveillance footage from that location showed him wearing a hooded jacket, sunglasses, and a cap, successfully avoiding facial recognition. By the time police tried to follow the trail, he was gone again. Rumors circulated that he may have boarded a ferry using a forged passport or slipped into a cargo shipment. Some speculated he might have headed toward rural France or Spain, where it would be easier to disappear among tourists and seasonal workers. Public shock turned to outrage. How could a father smile in family photos, tuck his children into bed, then destroy everything and walk away? The small note from Evelyn found in his wallet became the image that haunted everyone who followed the case. The innocence of her words contrasted horrifyingly with Michael's actions. Parents across the country found themselves unable to sleep, thinking of the fragile trust between children and the adults meant to protect them. Police believed Michael was changing his identity, possibly preparing for a life off-grid. But the unanswered question that disturbed investigators most was not how he escaped. It was why he chose to take the lives of the very people who loved him unconditionally instead of facing the consequences alone. Months passed after Michael Turner vanished, and the case slowly faded from the front pages, replaced by newer tragedies and scandals. Yet for the detectives who had worked tirelessly on it, the mystery remained like a ghost that refused to rest. The lack of a body meant no closure, and without closure, every clue felt unfinished. Then, nearly 5 months after the killings, a French fisherman trawling off the coast of Brittany discovered something tangled in his nets. A waterproof bag, weathered by salt and time. When authorities opened it, they found several documents inside: a passport belonging to Michael Turner, old family photographs, a wedding band, and the same black leather wallet that had been missing from his car. Inside that wallet was Evelyn's note, crumpled and water-stained, the ink slightly faded but still readable. It was confirmed by forensics to be authentic. The discovery reignited the case overnight. News outlets across the UK picked up the story again, speculating whether Michael had drowned or intentionally left those items behind as a distraction. Detectives traveled to France to work with local police, searching the nearby shoreline for any sign of human remains. Nothing was found. The tides along that part of the coast were unpredictable and strong. If he had entered the sea, his body could have been carried miles away. But something about the bag bothered investigators. It seemed deliberately sealed, as if it had been placed in the water, not lost to it. The plastic was wrapped in layers, ensuring its contents wouldn't be destroyed. That detail suggested intention. Back in Devon, Clara's surviving relatives struggled with grief that never eased. Her sister often spoke to the media, demanding that Michael be found dead or alive. "He doesn't deserve to disappear," she said in one emotional interview. "He deserves to be seen for what he did." Police kept receiving tips from people claiming to have seen him in Spain, in Scotland, even in small towns across Eastern Europe. None of the leads ever led to proof. He had become a shadow, slipping through cracks between borders and identities. Meanwhile, psychological experts were brought in to analyze his behavior. They described him as a narcissistic personality under pressure, someone who viewed his family as an extension of himself. When faced with failure, he couldn't imagine them living on without him, possibly witnessing his downfall. Killing them may have been his way of keeping control, twisted as it was. Some criminologists even believed he might have staged everything to ensure people remembered him not as a criminal, but as a tragic figure swallowed by despair. Years later, locals still tell stories about sightings along the coastmen who resemble him. Strangers with British accents renting cottages under false names. Nothing has ever been verified. The sea, vast and indifferent, guards its secrets well. For investigators, the small note found in that wallet remains the most haunting piece of evidence. Written by a child who wanted to comfort her father, it ended up symbolizing the purest form of love in the face of evil. In every retelling of the Turner case, that note is mentioned, the final message that echoed louder than Michael's crimes or his disappearance. Whether he drowned that night or built a new life somewhere far from the coast, the tragedy he created lives on in whispers, photographs, and the quiet words of a daughter who never knew what her love would cost.